Hi, my name is Alyssa Yo and the concept that I'll be discussing for this assignment is moral panics. Good and Ben Yehuda describe moral panics as the response to a group in society responding to the actions of another group of society whose actions or beliefs are seen as so problematic that they actually threaten the moral fibre of that particular society. So it's typically thought that steps must be taken in order to prevent these behaviours as well as rectify any damage that they've caused and restore society back to its original moral state. So moral panics generally stem from a behaviour that is seen to be devious by a certain group in society. So although there may be today some that we look back on and think that they're a bit ridiculous, at that particular time in that particular society those moral panics were a massive deal and they were really worrying for the people in that society at that particular time. So there are numerous examples of moral panics in action. Some are more serious and they threaten the health and the safety of a society. So for example, you've got swine flu or the ice epidemic is a more recent one. However, some moral panics are in response to issues that aren't as massive and don't have such a lasting impact. So the example that I'm going to be talking about with relation to moral panics is rock and roll music and people's attitudes towards it. A lot of people thought that it was anti-religious, it promoted sex and violence, and that it was corrupting the youth at that time. This was a massive deal, particularly in America, where a lot of religious people and the Bible Belt really thought that rock and roll music threatened the fundamental values of that society. So one major moral panic that came from rock and roll music was in response to the Beatles. Although we now look back at them as a massively iconic and music changing group, at the time there were certain people who were against the Beatles and thought that they were really threatening the youth. One of the major examples of this came from the result of comments by John Lennon, where he claimed that the group were bigger than Jesus. Lennon's exact comments were, "Christianity will go, it will vanish and sink, we're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity." So although the initial reaction to these comments was pretty minor within the UK, when the comments were republished in the US, they were taken out of context. The reaction to this was massive, particularly in the Bible Belt of the US, where people really boycotted the Beatles music. There was arranged burnings of Beatles memorabilia and Beatles records. Radio stations in the Deep South refused to play their music and promote the Beatles because they really feared that they were detracting away from religion and that their claims that they were bigger than Jesus were just going to corrupt the youth and make them turn to the Beatles as opposed to religion, something that was traditionally seen as very important. In this way, it's pretty clear that the Beatles caused a massive moral panic because people were boycotting their music, avoiding their memorabilia in response to a couple comments that threatened religion, something that was a massive part of the moral fibre of that society. So my next example is a pretty famous one and it comes from Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. So there were accusations that there were subliminal messages existing in certain songs in the genre of rock and roll. Some such examples come from Imagine by John Lennon, another one Bites the Dust by Queen, but perhaps most famously is Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. So when played backwards, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven allegedly contains satanic messages which promote Satanism and basically are subliminally trying to tell us to worship the devil. Many people claimed that Led Zeppelin were trying to subliminally convert the youth and get them to turn away from religion. Again, that was a massively important and fundamental part of the moral fibre of that society. So when people thought that this was happening, they were really against Led Zeppelin and that particular song. So the practice was termed as backmasking, in which an audio that is played backwards has a different message to the audio when it's played forwards. So in the case of Led Zeppelin, you have your satanic messaging. So despite everyone being involved in the album and the song denying any knowledge of any intentional backmasking, this is still a massive debate that's occurring today and people still really think that subliminal messages exist in the song and that the band were trying to convert the youth into Satanism and following Satan. So yeah, the massive backlash for Stairway to Heaven in their subliminal messaging and their backmasking can obviously show how that was a moral panic because people were against the anti-religious undertones of the song. So my last example is less religion and more education, and it comes from Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall. One of the main lines in the song is, and people thought that the band were trying to tell the youth that education wasn't important, they didn't need it, and they were trying to convert them away from a traditional lifestyle and towards one of rock and roll, which people again associated with violence, sex and anti-religious behaviours. So in a society that really values education and thinks that it's a fundamental part of life, this is really problematic, and therefore a lot of people were really angry about this song. So through these 3 examples you can see how rock and roll music was a moral panic, and it has one group, which were conservatives and religious people, against another group, so you have your rock and roll producers and the fans. This moral panic really did stem an entire 10 years, if not more, and yet something, like I said, a lot of the issues and concepts in this debate are still talked about today and still debated today. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope that this was helpful in understanding moral panics. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it made some sense, hopefully. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye!